do appreciate you taking the time to talk with us a little bit. I've been very interested in all of your writings for quite some time, introduced to them through John Mark on YouTube. So it's really exciting for me to be able to spend some time chatting with you about this stuff.
Well, talk to anybody intellectually honest. The problem is we're a small population.
This is very true. Yeah, most people have an agenda that they want to push, and they're gonna mince your words to make sure it fits that, right?
Correct. Well, it's also that um, the majority of young men online are not successful in life, which is why they have a lot of time for it. And so each of those men is not successful in life, in part because they don't have access to real men, in other words, men of achievement, because of the consequences of sortition. So the
Can
problem
you?
is that
I'm going to interrupt you because I just want to make sure I'm catching all of what you say. You said sortition. I don't know that word. What's that?
it means that um, we don't mostly live in small groups where there's a relatively normal distribution of abilities. Instead, we're increasingly sorted into a hierarchy by occupation, so that working class men are increasingly distant from the men who would normally take responsibility for them and normally share information with them. So what happens is that the enemy's been so successful at the destructions of our institutions of cultural production, the right can't unify. So we have fundamentalists on one end, Nazis on the other, libertarians and on one end, and civnats on the other, and those of us just trying to stay empirical, stuck in the middle with an inability to organize anything.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. So what that makes me think of when you're talking about the sortition, if I have that word right again,
Yeah, that's
uh,
it's a common word in social science and economics. It's they usually use it in the context of that people are sorting by geography simply because cities satisfy hyperconsumption and
mhm.
rural areas satisfy hypercapitalization. So we're actually sorting according to our intuitions, and you're seeing that. So that's where it comes in. So you'll find a disproportionate number of men than women in San Francisco and Seattle because of technology. You'll find a disproportionate number of women in D.C. and New York because they're searching for upward mobility. In other words, alpha males, which is why New York and D.C. are the deserts of ovaries.
That's a good description. I like that. What I was thinking of when you were talking about that, it made me think of, I think it was a Robert Heinlein quote when he was talking about specialization and how, men should be able to do, 100 different things. And now we're all, the phrase that most of the young guys use online is bug men, right? Specialization in one specific area as opposed to this kind of Renaissance approach to knowledge.
Well, the the general insight of the 1980s, which hasn't made it here yet, is through to us yet, is that, of course, what you want is, the example is computers. You want a small team of people to be responsible for the whole computer and to know everybody's job, right? And so that they're rotated. But the other effect is that they don't get unhappy. Two reasons. First, they're in a social group. Second, they develop a broader range of skills. And third, they can supplement to each other so the group is less fragile. Well, the same thing's true throughout life, right? I mean,
Hmm.
and so this is the same thing with the Dunbar number, right? 150. I noticed that in every company I build or acquire, that you're just trying to. I prefer to have 100 offices with less than 100 people in it because they all operate like families. But whenever you get hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people together, now you're talking about a polity, and politics run in. It's easy
Hmm.
to suppress politics at a low level. And it's easier for people who are caught in the politics of one small organization to defect to one more suited for them. But it gets increasingly difficult to keep politics out of hierarchical organizations. So you see this mostly as most of us see this in the customer service field, where let's say you have a local coffee shop that has good service. If you get one little bitchy woman in there, she'll drive out all the rest of the good ones and only hire less competing women for her.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have this constant degradation because one bad apple does spoil the whole bunch. So the issue is, and that's only possible because there's no hierarchy in place to maintain that mutation. Whereas if you get into certain numbers of people and you maintain a hierarchy, which is what small businesses generally are, especially if they're less than 20 or 50 guys, you end up having a pretty nice environment to work in, which is, of course, the attraction of startups for nerds. Anyway, so it's a normal human behavior we should expect. The problem is that the idea that we can all move to a few big cities and work in these big corporations in a city that runs as a corporation just basically means that the bitchy people win because every small organization is reduced to the bitchy person, and all the better people are either forced out or they move upward in the hierarchy until they no longer have to deal with the bitchy people. This means most people are fucked. Excuse my language.
No, please do. Yeah, no, we're all adults here, and boy, doesn't that concept have some really far-reaching implications if you can stretch that idea out outside of just examples that people can give you, huh?
Oh no, it's a universal problem of human behavior. It's why, for example, I always say we don't appreciate that we're abnormal in the world. The Middle East is actually normal. It means they can't form any trust organizations because it's actually honorable to lie, cheat, and steal. And it's in other words, evading work is heroic. Getting people under you to do the work is heroic. They've never transitioned to what we would consider the martial or the noblesse oblige society that we've always had. That I'm responsible for the men below me because we can't conduct a warfare otherwise. Where in their world you want to have people below you that you aren't responsible to feed you because you want to extract from them. And so the Middle East has maintained a low trust polity, unable to form large scale organizations, including the large scale formation of states or the large scale formation of militaries, which is why, of course, they use raiding strategy in their military, which we just saw in Afghanistan, just as we
Right.
use warfare medicine. We don't use raiding, we use warfare strategy. We just have forgotten that we've civilized warfare by doing what we do, and their barbaric means of warfare is more effective over the long term. So we don't consider our form of warfare a ritual, but it is. It's a ritual between aristocracy that's meant to maintain the behavior or the loyalty of the peasantry.
Oh, that's a really interesting thought. It does also make me think of the historical demonstration that guerrilla warfare, guerrilla tactics tend to work unerringly against this kind of rigid aristocratic method of maintaining order through warfare.
Correct, but what happens is that kind of warfare is dependent, can't build capital, so you've never seen a sustainable civilization in the Middle East. Because there's just as soon as somebody uses raiding to topple down the generation of raiders before them, right? Because those people have become settled, they just redistribute the capital of it and start the process all over again of maximizing rent seeking until another group comes along and uses the same technique. And because they've maximized rent seeking, they have no loyalties. So it's a pervasive churn. The only people that were able to somewhat slow this were when the Turks defeated obviously the Muslims, the Arabs created Islam. They defeated everybody by destroying all these civilizations.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Persians came along and tried to reconstruct civilization, and they failed. And then the Turks came in and crucified them. By the same process, they defeated um, the Arabs, and then they started to get into Europe, but of course they calcified. They had to run a slave army. So the problem with these other civilizations is they never quite get it right. The only way to win is to not be selfish and to work for the benefit of the team. The problem is we live in a world, Europe and China lived in a world where that's possible because everybody's near kin. But in the Middle East, it's the intersection of four continents, and everybody's not kin.
And that's the direction that we're heading now. There is very
Why do
few.
you think the Jewish group of moved to of Bolsheviks of Eastern Europeans moved to Germany, then from Germany to America because they figured out that the problem was among white folks, us, capitalism can save the labor class. So they very deliberately said it's not like they were quiet about it. They wrote down what they were going to do. They said, we're going to go to America and use the blacks because blacks can't be saved by capitalism because they're not competent in sufficient numbers to be moved from the laboring class, from the agrarian class to the laboring class to the workman class. And that's true because it's just a distribution of IQ. It's not that all black people are stupid or something. It just means that the median of the African distribution is 85, which means half of them are incompetent for even the most basic labor, and so they're permanently screwed in our society, which is meritocratic. So what did the Jewish group of leftists do? They came here and they turned it from a class issue to a race issue so they could use the race to undermine our civilization, just like they used class to undermine European civilization, just like they used class and sex to undermine Roman civilization and with Christianity. So it's the same process. They just use the female method of warfare, which is to generate conflict by false promise, like you talk to your children, false promise of freedom from the laws of nature if they obey you. Well, of course, the laws of nature in this case are white folk, and white folk are evil because we most closely adapt to the laws of nature of all human beings, or groups of human beings, and the reason is accidental, but the reason we discovered science and all this other nonsense and reason and technology is because we have the least friction with the laws of the universe. And the reason we do that is painful, which means we have historically suppressed the reproduction of the underclass instead of tried to raise some of them up into the working and freedom classes because it increases all the benefit for all of us. Whereas in the Middle East, especially, they instead wanted to keep everybody in these lower classes and ignorant so that they could continue to extract from their agrarian production. Not that they were capable of much else, which we can see already.
That reminds me of something that Dr. Edward Dutton, I'm sure you're familiar with, talked about in the criminal prosecution or even persecution of the criminal class or of the underclass in Europe, creating a situation where, and I want to put it in as plain in terms as possible, dumb people just didn't have kids. And so you've got an ever increasing mean IQ among the Europeans. And then my personal addition to that would be, having harsh winters that you had to learn to survive creates that high trust society, but also creates that situation where shitty people just don't live through the winter and they can't go on and make more shitty people.
Well, the first cause, which everybody knows, is the four or five generations of man reflect. In other words, the increase in neoteny means the decrease in aggression, the increase in cognitive capacity and agency, are a reflection of geography, which means a direction of latitude. And it's for that reason, right? You have to cooperate in smaller numbers and there's less chance of defect. The problem for Africa is that there's nowhere to isolate and speciate. However, once they got it out of East, were able to isolate and speciate in East Africa. When they left Africa, they were able to get into the then dry Persian Gulf, isolate and speciate. Then we had the branching effect of East and West as we covered Eurasia. The East Asians seem to have speciated, it looks like, either we don't know which way they went around India. There's two hypotheses, but the general idea is they got into the Tibet and they speciated there. We got East Asians. We know what happened to Europeans. We got above the threshold into Europe, and we speciated in Europe multiple times, with the most recent generation being the ancestral North Eurasians in North Russia, which made us what we consider today. So we're actually a very young race by compared to the other races. It's just that the East Asians have been neotenizing, in other words, retaining childhood properties and slower development, longer than white people have. The South Eurasians, who are not white, so to speak, they are the people from the north of Africa, the east of India. They've been lower, which is their IQ is 84 or 85, and the Africans who are in the 50s, 60s, 70s, their IQ is quite low, and they are the first generation. So we know what happened, and we know why, and I teach this why it happened. It's unfortunate for the people who want to deny the difference between the races. The fundamental difference is actually is class size, but realistically, class is just cognitive capacity, and intelligence just means the rate of adaptation in time. So, these things are normal. So you've correctly identified the climate as one of the factors because it allowed for isolation events, which allowed for speciation events, and the selection pressure in those areas is for higher domestication, which because people have to live in close proximity with the especially during winters. We see this most advanced in some of the late Scandinavian cultures. But you also brought up the other ones, and I think that I don't, I know which one Dutton's referring to, but I'm going to bring in the earlier one,
I
which
appreciate it.
which is the French author who's I can't believe his name's escaping right now, studied bipartite manorialism, which is where you can't get in along the Hainaut line, or this what we consider Protestant Europe. You couldn't get access to land and reproduce unless you were a person of good character and married. So this caused really high selection pressure, etc. But even before that, we had slaves and serfdom, which you could control reproduction by, and like you said, we had harsh winters, and so even back, what was you doing? How do you, if you look at slaves in prehistoric Europe, in other words, before the Greeks, you
Mm-hmm.
see like women have these bony structures on their knees from grinding grain all day, and they die young. So it's not like these women had children. They don't have any marks of children. It's the same thing for some men. So if you're in a slave condition, your opportunities for reproduction are significantly lower. And so this is not like a new thing. This has been going on for literally for 5,000 years. So the fact that if you take the slavery, you take the climate, you take slavery, you take bipartite manorialism, you take the church, etc., you get with fairly high selection pressure, although it really looks more like two things have happened. One is it's more that we've bred out the bottom than necessarily exceeded,
Mm-hmm.
excelled. And that's what would produce the distribution we have. And that's really all you have to do. It's all any people have to do is they have to constrain the reproduction of the bottom until that they can produce a Pareto hierarchy that compete economically, which means that you always have to keep increasing your group IQ in order to be able to make use of the next available technology to maintain your relative competitive advantage, to maintain your standard of living. Of course, what they're doing by immigrating all these people is they've dropped us now to 97, I think, and we'll hit 95 soon. That means that the coastal areas will be too dumb for democracy and market civilization.
Yeah, and you can see it. It's not even something that you have to think about as going on in the future. You can see it right now. Most people will tell you California is just too dumb to be able to do it. And why is that? Because it's less than half white.
Yeah, or again, I get in trouble for both sides for this, but I have friends in Ghana, and there are evidently people in in Nigeria, Nigerians in particular, because Nigeria, Ghana was essentially the Northern Europe of Africa.
Hmm.
Those people can compete in the world stage just fine. I
Sure.
mean, you find plenty of 140 IQ guys in Nigeria, right? So so it's the problem is that we need to think of it more as differences in class size, and that's really the problem. And the problem is the differences in class size causes the different policies, and it basically puts most of the pressure on the guys in our lower half. They end up getting screwed. So
Now,
that's
when you say differences in class size, you're talking about higher IQ people, lower IQ people. You're just going to have, because of the laws of averages, and the average IQ of these groups, you're going to have more people in that lower section or quadrant or whatever than you are in the higher, right?
right. And so for just behavioral economics, who are you going to get more association opportunities with? People who think, act, and feel most like you and who share the same traditions. So the problem is that we say we're going to bring these people together and they're going to merge, but they never do, and they never have, and they never will. So what happens is you get enough defect into our middle class from the Africans to screw over the rest of the Africans. You get enough defect from the Hispanics to screw over the Hispanic. I mean, for all intents and purposes, statistically, it seems that Mexico no longer has an upper class. In other words, a genetic test. And I want to reiterate, intelligence is only one of two properties. You need two things. Intelligence is just the rate of cognitive adaptation. It's the limit, it lowers the cost of information necessary to make your brain form a network, right? Of that it's capable of auto association, modeling, and prediction. In other words, thinking clearly.
Right. Pattern recognition.
Correct. The opposite is you need to have conscientiousness. And so conscientiousness is the other axis. You'll find that conscientiousness provides you with success across the spectrum, regardless. And intelligence doesn't. Intelligence sort of maxes out at some level. And the reason is there aren't enough people for you to build a market with, to provide advantage to at the top. So it's actually you need to have both. But what produces these behavior, and then we have what we call agency, which is the ability to use them both,
Hmm.
which is demonstrated behavior. So the demonstrated behavior problem is that people who are each of those neotonic generations I gave you, which is a spectrum of least neoteny to the most, what it means is they have shorter gestation, quicker maturity, and they have more. So they have more impulsivity and more aggression.
R
So
selected versus K selected.
correct. So what we have is we have high, this incredible pressure, status pressure, negative status pressure on Africans when they're next in us in white society. They have because they're at the bottom, that we have incredible behavioral pressure that they can't actually abide by, which only reinforces the negative status pressure, which means that more than half of them can't compete in the market, which means there's economic as well as behavioral status pressure, which means there's which is amplified by the fact that they bind together because of that, which forms a normative attack on status pressure. And we have to remember that the basic unit of accounting for human beings is status, because status is the only thing that gets us discounts on opportunity to cooperate. So, if you're a one percenter like me, the problem is how do you get rid of the opportunities that are coming at you so you only have to bother with the good ones? The problem for the bottom 50% is nobody wants to fucking give them an opportunity because the friction of cooperating with them is so high. So basically, by having us integrated, these people are screwed, which is exactly what the left wants.
It makes me think of the Kalergi plan. The idea is essentially to have a slave class and then your upper ruling class. Kalergi said that ruling class naturally should be the Jewish, European, Ashkenazi types.
Well, we don't know who wrote either that or the what is that, the
Well,
elders of Zion.
it's Richard von
Right.
something or other, the Count of Kalergi, right?
No, hold on. Right, who wrote these, right? But are these are cast as conspiracy theories, but they're not, right? They're, no matter who wrote them, they're observations. So we don't know if, I don't want to get into all that because it's a no-win for me as a scientist because I can't prove it either way. All I
Okay.
can say is that it's not an inaccurate expression of their strategy. However, the thing is, you don't need to have that as an overt strategy if your natural instinct, like the female, is always and everywhere to undermine males.
Okay.
And so, that you're talking about a genetic strategy that they evolved in the Middle East that through reproduction and cultural assimilation became a group evolutionary strategy that 90% of them follow, right? Because it's
Mm-hmm.
just their programming and instinct. And just like there's a few guys like me, well, I mean, I don't know if there's anybody else like me, but there's a few of us on our side who understand our group strategy and can articulate it in scientific terms. There's a few people on their side that can do it. And so the difference is they, like women, they continually agitate and never stop, whereas we're actually seeking the point of non-agitation. So it's very difficult because their means of distribution of undermining, which is gossiping, shaming, rallying, moralizing, undermining, lying, cheating, stealing false promises, baiting into hazard. Their system for undermining a civilization is as evolved as our system of rule of law is. And we don't think of it that way. We don't think
Mm-hmm.
that we practice rule of law. We don't even think. I can articulate the Western group evolutionary strategy in one sentence. It's a long one, and the Jewish strategy in one sentence. But nobody know what other Westerners can. None. The reason
Yeah.
we practice it, right? It's metaphysical. We don't know it. We just take that as the world for granted. But they take the opposite strategy, and then in effect, Europeans are the male extreme of group evolutionary strategy, and Jews are the female extreme of group evolutionary strategy,
When
and
you
they behaviorally
articulate
do that.
those in a sentence, I'm sure my listeners would love to hear that sentence. Can you do it
For Europeans,
for either or for both?
I'll do Europeans because then it'll make sense. Um, the It's a way lot longer to do the Jewish one. The European is very easy because it takes is the one example we know. What kind of government do pirates have?
Uh, it would be
It's democ-
dictatorial, wouldn't it?
no, it's democracy.
Is it? Okay.
Right. So what they have is a constitution, a contract, because they're all volunteers. They're all going on a risky business venture. This business venture is very risky. They separate the power, which means they elect a captain. The captain may bring a boat or not, and he will get extra shares for bringing the boat and being the captain. But he can be decaptained relatively easily. And they produce another guy, another person, who's responsible for divvying up the loot. And these people are a separation of powers in other words, these people form separation of powers. So you have a guy who divvies up the loot and judges conflicts between men, and a guy who orders the men. But this
Mm-hmm.
separation of powers is written as a contract. We have lots of copies of them. So why is that? Well, it's not possible to organize a high risk entrepreneurial venture by any other means when the only capital you bring into it is violence. Well, what did our ancestors do? They combined horse, cart, and wheel to build what we think of as covered wagons, or they think of as yurts on wheels. And they left the lower river valleys of Russia in the spring to go out on the steppe and graze. But what was just a means of sustenance. The way you get rich is you get a bunch of guys in their horses and carts or chariots, which is what we think about them, and, together, and you go raid other people's cattle. Well, how do you do this? It's only one way. And that's the origin of Western civilization. It's what we call democracy, and rule of law is the origin of that basic strategy. And you see this most, not in Athens, you see it most accurately in what record we have of Sparta, which is the men go out, right? They conquer and take territory. They keep the women they want and enslave the rest of the men and make them as work. And they've turned themselves into a professional group of warriors. But how do you govern that professional group of warriors? Well, you have to govern it pretty much as a democracy in most cases, in the distribution of loot, so to speak, and a judiciary in the selection of policy, and as authority in the execution of war. And this is only because those are the only three decision-making processes that are possible for those three contexts when you have professional warriors, each of which is marginally indifferent from the other. So that's the origin of Western civilization. So what does that, how do you express that in legal terms or in scientific terms? You'd say that men who bear arms reciprocally, I mean, to all one another, equally exchange insurance of one another, and they ensure the sovereignty, in other words, of demonstrated interest. In other words, if you were responsible for your wins, you get to keep them, right? By limiting themselves to reciprocity in display, word, and deed, meaning what libertarians think of non-aggression, and reciprocity, display, words, and deed. This leaves only markets for voluntary cooperation available to all members, which means markets and everything: association, cooperation, reproduction, production, commons, polities, and war. So what you get out of this is what we think of as rule of law, but is the maximum rate of adaptation possible in any social order, or at least possible for man in any social order, because there is no friction to adaptation, no friction to innovation, and only friction to loss. So Western man evolved faster than all other civilizations combined in both the Bronze, so in other words, the Indo-European expansion, the Mediterranean, the rationalist expansion, and the North Sea the Atlantic expansion that united the world. So these are the Bronze, Iron, and Steel ages, with two Dark Ages in the middle. The first being the consequence of the disruption of our expansion into Europe and downward. The second, that was the Bronze Age collapse. The second being the success that the Christians, like the woke, at destroying the institutions of cultural production of the Mediterranean. And third, the classical recovery in Europe, starting with the restoration of fundamentalism in Islam and the flight of scholars back to Europe, and the invention of the printing press and the Italian translation of classical works, which led to the Protestant Reformation and the Scientific Revolution, the agrarian, it's actually the Empirical Revolution, the Agrarian Revolution, the Commercial Revolution, the Financial Revolution, and the subsequent Industrial Revolution, and the subsequent technological and medical revolutions. So we adapt faster than all of them combined, but we do this because at one cost. That one cost is suppression of the reproduction of the underclass instead of expanding, stagnating, because we parasitically live off the underclass.
Now, you had said earlier about the Dark Ages and that having to do a lot with Christianity. I wonder if you would expand on that and maybe touch on why a return to what I think is already a failed strategy, and I think you do too, why that wouldn't work. Can you expand on that?
I'm just not sure which you could mean returning to Christianity.
Exactly. Yeah. The fundamentalist point of view, which is, you're going to have to accept Jesus.
They live under the illusion that it worked. So And I'm like, yeah, your ancestors experienced century after century of declining knowledge, increasing poverty until the Vikings were restored to Europe because the Christian churches who domesticated Europeans were unable to create a military force. So they directed the energy of the Vikings, or basically the people who'd recently been civilized, so to speak, to the salvation, and then they pulled back before they finished it. I mean, there was no reason Europeans didn't conquer the Middle East back then, just like there's no reason we just didn't conquer them in World War I or conquer them now. And the answer is we just don't want to because they're impossible. So the answer is Christianity is the mandatory ignorance, mandatory, and then in exchange for irresponsibility for anything. And so they lie about all this stuff, but I mean, in the end, there's no difference between the false promise of life after death in exchange for obedience to superstition, and so that you don't have to be responsible for your status or your low status, or responsible for a status signal pressure, or that you don't have to be responsible for the commons, or don't have to be responsible for picking up arms and keeping the enemy out. It's just irresponsibility because it's a feminine strategy. What is all female behavior reducible to? Complaining, whining, bitching, whatever, in order to generate stress among men so they solve the problem. What is female strategy to create stress in men? It's done by undermining. And what is female natural inclination to do is escape all costs not directly related to her children and push that cost onto men. So what is the enemy doing? Exactly that. They're just taking the female strategy. The problem is we think they have to understand it to do it. And just like our people think they understand what they're doing, they can't even talk about it. Well, they can't. If I didn't say it's the use of arms for the reciprocal insurance to guarantee the sovereignty and demonstrated interests, limiting us to reciprocity and display word and deed, and as a consequence, markets for survival in every one of the markets of possible means of cooperation, thus yielding the greatest rate of adaptation available to any human organization. They wouldn't have any idea.
The words that are too complex for most people, right?
It's actually really simple because it's how the universe operates, right? I mean, you either have anyway. It's just physics. The only difference between the physical world and us is that we can remember and the world can't. Right?
I did try to do a bit of a breakdown on kind of the proprietarianism 101. I don't know if you remember seeing that, but trying to get what shouldn't be all that complicated into terms that your average everyday American can understand isn't easy. And I'm sure you know that better than I do. I think that was where John's big talent was in.
Yeah. Unfortunately, he figured out that most of these people there's 1,000 one good man for every 1,000 fucking losers on the right. So
well, that's what Harold said. He said, this is the job is we're panning for gold in a stream of shit, right? Just going to have to keep sifting and looking for that little bit of color.
Well, the thing is, we're not going to find them. The reason is that anybody worth anything is worth something. And so what they want to do is they want to have a practical solution. If you're offering theology or philosophy or ideology, which is I won't name the three leaders of those three camps, but I mean we have populists online in all three of those camps. They're loser magnets.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so anybody that's participating in those conversations is by definition somebody we want to leave behind anyway.
Yeah.
So
well, and I think that's kind of the beauty of the Northwest Imperative, the Butler Plan, because it is you have to put the effort into doing it. You have to pack up your van. You have to get your ass home.
There's no escape though. There's only one way out of this, and it's to fight, and we don't need too many guys to do that.
Yep.
So I would say you can't run because everybody who's run has eventually been defeated.
Yeah.
You can't defeat the Abrahamic method of cancer, civilizational destruction, by running from it, because it eventually eats everything around you.
Well, I do want to push back just a little bit, because the Northwest Imperative, the Butler Plan, is not white flight. It is white fight. It's
yeah, I
a
understand.
strategic retreat.
Yeah, okay. I'll say okay, fine. What that means is nobody's got the balls to show up. So I'll say this over and over again: is no, it isn't. It's just cowardice, and there's only one solution. Well, if you say you want to have, what I hear is, well, let's just keep getting along and doing without any costs until we have an opportunity. That's crap. The only thing that has to happen right now is 2 million. It used to be 100,000. Now it's 2 million. We need 2 million guys to show up, and we don't have to fight anybody. We just need to say this is it. We hold a constitutional convention with those 2 million guys, and it's over, because they can't field enough force against us. And what I learned in Ukraine is the minute they shoot at you, the whole world will take them down. So it's not that I don't want them to get together. We don't want them to shoot at us. We do.
Yeah. Um,
So I'm probably gonna take advantage of the moving back to the Northwest. So I'm not pissing on that. I'm just saying it. No, that's not an answer to fucking anything. It's just that I would rather be around guys. I'd rather have a social life while I'm preparing for this.
Yeah.
Than that was more amenable than it. But you're not gonna. There's no way. I mean, they have. There's no way. There's no strategy other than we have a few years left to move before their strategy of delay and deceive and accumulate forces has succeeded, and it's going to have to be pretty soon.
Well, I think where we're having a disagreement here boils down to what we want to achieve. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the kind of steps that are illustrated in Harold's novels, but the idea is not to take America back or something like that. I think that's a pipe dream. There is no getting America back, but we can secure some territory so that we can raise some generations of men and women, of good white men and women that haven't been poisoned, that aren't going to be poisoned by the kind of brainwashing that you get out of the New York crowd.
I'm an empiricist. I don't fantasize. I just go by data. So the Amish only exist because we let them.
Mm-hmm.
Who's going to let you exist?
Well, yeah, it's not. There's no but. Nobody's going to be asking.
There is no but. Period.
Nobody's going to be asking, is what I mean.
There's nothing you're going to do that doesn't evolve using force to create a new state.
Agreed, 100%. That's why I say I don't think you're all that familiar with the plan, but that's all part of the plan. Yeah.
Okay, fine. What I hear is we don't know how to organize, so I'm going to throw this out and hope that someone does. So
that's what most people hear. I understand.
I'm going to be hostile to anything that isn't. Get off your ass and do something that basically that serves the same purpose as our founders did, which is create a suit against the state that sues for restitution and punishment of bad actors, and then restores the Constitution to its original condition as a loose federation of states and the ability to reorganize that states as we see fit. So I don't think anything else is possible. First of all, because I don't think anything else is legally or structurally possible. But there's no other way to win. Winning is actually fairly easy. Now, the FBI has told me to be very careful that I don't. They would love to put me away, so be very careful that I'm not inciting violence. I'm saying that the only solution is this, and it will not lead to violence. In other words, the only solution is to have enough men together so that it's impossible to use violence against them.
I see. So at one point in the novels, what's discussed is, after a few years of conflict, let's say, the U.S. government is forced to the table, and at that point, an agreement is reached, an agreement for sovereignty, for an exclusive territory in the Northwest, and that is, I think, where people get confused. They think they don't understand that there is a whole process behind this as opposed to
It
just a
doesn't
single
matter because
idea.
the Northwest isn't sustainable. In order to be able to make anything function, you need the Mississippi River Valley. So you basically need everything. You need everything from the Rockies to Ohio, and you need to cut out the part at the top that's anyway. You have to do that. You need Texas. Otherwise, you're dead. You're dead like like Ukraine is dead. Ukraine can't move because it has no possible trade routes.
Hmm.
So they're on a border, they're the borderland, and so they're screwed. And this is my home. I consider Ukraine my home, so it's somewhat painful to me. On the other hand, Russia's in the same position. Why did Russia have to expand? Does she still feel she has to expand? Because
Because it needs the ports.
it needs the ports. And so the problem is in the Northwest, you're like, what you're saying is uh, you want to be Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic. You want to be screwed on all sides.
Well, no,
So
Seattle and Portland would be part of that Northwest, and so there would be water, deep water ports that trade routes would be available to, even back into Russia.
okay, now let me just try. So what are you going to do about the people in Seattle and Portland?
Well, nothing that I would say on air, but
Okay,
I
so
would
then
say read the
what's
books.
the point of limiting it to the least valuable territory in the country?
Well, there's.
Why limit that procedure to there?
Mhm.
Because it takes the same amount of effort to do
Well, let me
those two
answer.
cities than
Yeah,
it does the whole country.
let me answer. Because at some point the power structure is going to have to be asked to the table. And one of the things that they're going to need is a way out of it, right? And you can never take somebody's complete power, but you can't. I mean, unless you want to destroy them. But you can take something that they may not care so much about, right? That's why it's a corner way out on the other side of the country that nobody
I
in
think
New
it's
York and
rationalization.
DC gives a shit.
That's rationalization. The
Yeah.
strategic target is because you haven't thought about economics, you haven't thought about monetary flows or power. The right answer is you take Texas. If you want to try anything, it's Texas. Texas has its own power grid. Texas has its own mints, its own treasury. It has its
Hmm.
own central bank. You take Texas, you push to Denver. Now you've divided the two, and you own everything. So that's if you want to pursue a strategy, pursue one that's strategically rational. But sitting there on the edge where nobody, I mean, first of all, it's you have they're yeah. Uh, I think it's one of those things of justifying a prior rather than looking at the field of opportunities and choosing the field of opportunities. So anyway, I'm just going to sit there. I don't want to really argue. I don't want to piss on anything anybody's doing. I'm just saying that it's justification and it's a weak plan. But you know what? It's still a plan, and somebody thought about it and invested in it. So fine. And frankly, I'd rather live out there with you guys than other people anyway.
Well, I appreciate that, and yeah, I'm not going to put anything out that's going to put you or me in some kind of a conflicting light. Our conversation is going to be trimmed down to so that everybody sounds nice and happy and great. I just love
I don't.
having
I
somebody to
don't like
bounce
my
ideas
stuff.
off of.
I don't like my stuff edited. By the way, it's
Oh,
okay.
okay.
I don't say anything that I wouldn't say in the front page of the New York Times,
Hmm.
because and I say I'm very careful not to cross any lines. But
Yeah.
if but the answer is we have justification for a common law suit against the state and a repetition of our founders. The founders established the method for the correct adjudication of those differences, and the North and South conflict violated that establishment of it. And whether their reasons were just or not was up to them. But and there are strategic reasons the North and South had to do what they did. On the other hand, we're not in that position anymore, and they're clearly burning down capital. This is theft in order to and destroying our middle and working classes in order to replace them with dependent serfs. And they're hoping that they can manage a decline and at the benefit of the financial and bureaucratic classes who are restoring basically serfdom. So I don't, and the serfs are fucking happy about it. Let's get it straight. The majority of people aren't ready for freedom. They want to be serfs.
No kidding.
They absolutely positively do, and it's not right for us to claim that they need freedom. They don't need it, they can't do it, and so they don't want it. So we have to look at the world instead of the project to the belief, the Jeffersonian fallacy of an aristocracy of everyone failed. It failed by the French Revolution. But we've taken a long time to play out the theory. The theory's failed. The world doesn't want it because the world isn't genetically capable of it. So we are. That's what we want. It's our competitive advantage. So we need to create states that allow us to do it. Just like we should allow them to follow their fantasies. We just want to,
Absolutely.
right? And so that's the original intent of the formation of the government, which is to use the English rule of law, which is the invention of the modern state, to repeat the Holy Roman Empire, which is a collection of small German states, all with a very, very, very weak central government and a very, very weak central judiciary we call the church, right? And that's all we need to do is we just need to recreate that and restore rule of law for us, and they can have arbitrary rule for them. But that's the only thing that's possible. It's also the only moral claim. In other words, there's no more moral claim you can make. It's also one that they definitely cast themselves as immoral and wrong if they try to oppose. So I don't know why this is a fairly difficult thing. We have a template. That template is encoded in our law. It's encoded in our history and our ethics. It's the basis of the common law. It's the basis of European law for 5,000 years. And so if people want to be serfs, that's their right to self-determination. But they cannot deprive us of their right to self-determination. So sort into serfdoms, which is what they want, which is high and low, and we'll sort into freedom, which is the majority middle. And that's fine. They'll be left behind as peasants, of course, the poor peasants, and we'll continue our rapid evolution, which is why they're afraid of it, because it'll invalidate their civilization.
And to do that, we're going to have exclusive territory because you can't have the leeches sucking all the capital out of your society.
Right,
Yeah.
and they'll keep up the argument that fine, your red states will be poorer. And I'm like, well, that's only because you don't get that all you're doing is burning debt in those urban areas. You're not actually making anything. It shows up as a positive number on an income statement, and right, but you don't understand it's just debt. It's not income. So, if you say to us, what are we going to do? We're just going to have kids, create commons. The difference is we can create commons because we're not parasites. The problem for you guys is you're all parasites, so you can't create commons except with debt. It's not complex. It's not complicated. It's math. It's math, and it's math, science, and totally deterministic.
The commons is a big theme in propertarianism, and it's also something that I think is highly misunderstood amongst our people. I wonder if you could kind of flesh out what the commons are for people.
I suppose we've discussed just calling it commonism because that's really what it is.
Mm-hmm. Doesn't ring so great in people's ears, though.
It's the opposite of communism. So communism says there's no private property, and for that matter, no commons. We say that the purpose of the group is to produce commons. In other words, commons being parks, neighborhoods, places for families, peace, education, all the good things. Right?
Well, too, wouldn't like a water supply and arable land and all of those things also be considered commons?
Right. Yeah, just that I was trying to work outward. I was trying to work outward from to there, and you're trying to work.
Sorry.
There. No, it's just the same story either way. But the difference is that you have resources in a territory, but the territory has to be created by common effort. In other words, common defense.
Mm-hmm.
So a commons is anything that's commonly defended against consumption. So,
which is why we would be really the real environmentalist movement, would we not?
Correct. Because there is no environmental crisis. There's a population crisis. All right. The problem is that evolution requires a continuous increase in the transformation of energy per capita. If you look at the evolution of man, that's all that's happening. If you look at any evolutionary system, it's the continuous increase in the transformation of of energy by some sort of genetic process or life process. So what we've done as mankind is we got to where we could cooperate, which allowed us to eat everything on the planet to the point where we had to invent agrarianism so that we could eat something else.
And we had to invent Weight Watchers too.
To the point where now our biggest problem is eating too much. So at the cost of burning 100 million years worth of trees, so to speak, as petroleum products. But anyway, so you can't stop. The environmentalists are still thinking in herds that more is better. Of course, more is always worse. What you're trying to do is say more per capita than more energy transformation per capita. So that means that there's no end to our ability, to our need to maintain energy transformation per capita in order to continue evolution, because there's no end to the evolution. There's no end to the race of the Red Queen, whether we talk about it among mankind or nature or the climate or geology or the solar system or the universe. There's no end. And frankly, we've done everything we're aware of, conscious of, has taken place in a brief warm period in the human history, in global history, on a planet that's all but hostile to letting us survive on it.
Is that why something like, say, the John Birch Society was originally a conservative or conservationist position?
I don't know. I don't go back and try to justify anchor points of power. We have a bunch of idiots in this world and the Christians are the same. They're regressing to an anchor point in the past that they can understand instead of the future anchor point that they need to understand. And so the future anchor point is we either restore our rate of adaptivity and maintain our genetic, cultural, and territorial advantage, or we don't. And we make the choice for all men that follow us through all of history, as long as there is history to be made. So I don't go back and look at this stuff, just like I think all philosophers are basically liars. I know all theologians are liars. I think most philosophers are liars. And so I just don't go back to this nonsense. It's a really simple thing. We're all done with philosophy. Philosophy was done with Darwin. There's no philosophy left anymore except choice. In other words, preference. Truth is really simple. Science has solved the last problem, basically all but the last problem that we have to face. And so we know the law, and that's what my work does, is say this is the law going forward. If it's whether you want to call it the law of nature, the law of God, or whatever, or the laws of the universe, it doesn't make any difference. This is the science of human cooperation in furtherance of human condition and evolution. Period. End of story. There's no more discussion. So these are the choices available to us at any given point of time. Which choice do you want to make? Because the outcome is deterministic. It doesn't matter what you want. It matters what outcome is deterministically produced by those choices that you make. So we just get to choose. We get to choose whether we're going to organize a couple of million people large enough to make it impossible for the state to rebel against, large enough to control the discourse, and large enough to demand the same kind of reformation as we have, or we're going to disappear into the night, and that's all there is to it.
You have to make it more trouble than it's worth, right? To quell the uprising, if you will.
And you have to control the dialogue. So, my demands, or what I would suggest we have for demands, are pretty simple. Is the first set of demands we make is to have an honest discussion. You can't have an honest discussion when they can use the female mean of undermining to circumvent the common law, which we developed over 5,000 years, which limits us to market competition by truthful meaning reciprocal means, or by disputes, in other words, via positiva competition, or the courts via negativa competition for injustices. Those are the two choices we have. What we don't get to do in our history, is undermine each other, which is why we invented things like reason and science and courtrooms and juries, because you have to put your arms away. That doesn't mean just physical arms. It means lying, cheating, stealing. It means undermining. So that's our choice. We created two markets, a positive market and a negative market for the resolution of differences. And both of these markets are purely empirical. The minute you bring in gossiping, rallying, shaming, undermining, moralizing, reputation destruction, interference in marriage, interference in work, you're no longer competing in a market with truth and reciprocity.
And those are the female ways of waging war. And you'll see that in the press and on TV and in any of your media. And there's a reason for that.
They're war. It's war. It's
Mm-hmm.
simple war. And they're using the female method of war. And our law used to contain defenses against the female method of war. But we got this stupid idea because they couldn't solve the problem of truth, which is one of the central premises, one of the central solutions of my work, is they couldn't solve the problem of truth. So they said you got to have freedom of speech and freedom of press. You have to have freedom of speech and freedom of press, of truthful reciprocal speech. And right. You have to have that right. In other words, but you don't have the right to lie, cheat, scheme, and whatever. And they open the doors. They open the doors at two times. They not only let women into the workforce, they also brought in the people who specialize in the industrialization of lying by lying, cheating, stealing, gossiping, shaming, moralizing, and their means of warfare against the institution of culture of production, doing it in order to foment discord among our people, divide us, weaken us, and therefore conquer us.
And those people are the ones that were historically and for thousands of years and who developed their life strategies around being an outsider. We then allowed them in and put them in control of our institutions.
Right, because our institutions our institutions weren't based on anymore on outcomes. They were based like the Chinese. What same reason the Chinese bureaucracy failed? Based on tests. They weren't. We gave up meritocracy. So it used to be that you had to be in the aristocracy, in other words, show that you were competent before you got into a university, or at least somehow. Right? But now we don't have to do that. Any fucking idiot can get into a university without demonstrating moral, ethical, and civilizational competency. That's one. They get in there and then they deprogram them. I mean, if you study law at Yale, which I've gone through, or Harvard, or Georgetown, these schools are not producing people who assist in the governance of Western civilization by the ancient rule of law, them limiting us to market competition. What they're doing is in creating revolutionaries who are specifically taught how to undermine that rule of law.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, these places, we have to clean house. So we can the problem is cleaning house means we've got a third of the population, of our own population, that really needs to go away somehow. What are we going to do? We have a third of the population that's unfit. Well, I mean, we can make the people who say, I want all of America back, I think, why don't you just do ourselves an evolution a favor and say, we've gotten rid of them and separate.
Yeah, I agree
all
completely.
we have to do to separate is raise the standard of tolerable behavior in public before punishment, right? Such that they can't do it. And it's really easy. We just enact laws for raising the standard of punishment. And with my work, it's now law is a science, not a philosophy. It's just like math. There's no way out of it. There's no confusion anymore. There's none of this. The Jews brought positive law into the West for various reasons because they use positive law. They got the French implemented theirs. Now the continent is lost, and thankfully the Anglo civilization never got brought into that. We still have our common law, in which the origin and the basic principles of which are 5,000 years old. I'm just the first guy to write them down in scientific form and show that they're just reflection of the laws of the universe. In other words, what we do is just what we call evolution. In other words, Western European civilization is just following the same rules as evolution, which just follows the same rules of the rest of the universe.
One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about was I don't know if you're familiar with it, so it's kind of hard to jump into the subject. But there is a proposed or a draft constitution that's available on the northwestfront.info cite. I don't know how familiar you are with that, but there are some areas there where I see some conflict between what would be proprietarianism and then also what would be kind of the standard draft of what we think is appropriate for our people moving forward as a rule of
Now,
law.
what you got is a statement of a loose statement of philosophy that's unscientific. In other words, there are you can it may be it is impossible to achieve those ends. The structure that the Constitution is written in is insufficient to produce those ends.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think there's that much of a constitution. There's a difference. The difference in my work is I state about what is true and what is, and then there's a question of how do you go about it. Well, how you go about it, as long as it's true and reciprocal, doesn't matter to me, right? I'm not solving that problem. I mean,
Okay.
I'm recommending a constitution, or
Mm-hmm.
which is basically a Chinese menu, and it says here's the way you can do this without lying, cheating, and stealing.
Well, that's perfect. Yeah, because it's exactly what the NAR is. It's a list of recommendations of things that ought to be considered. But
Right.
like I tell people all
The
the
problem
time,
is
I
they
say,
have to be,
I'm sorry.
I understand that. So I could take that and say, okay, if you want this to work, the Constitution has to be written like this. Right. And and the reason is for anything you say, you've got to strictly construct it from what I described as natural law. So
Mm-hmm.
if you can strictly construct it, and that means for everything you say, you have a right, an obligation, and an alienation.
So
And
I'm really familiar with the right and then responsibility going hand in hand. Are you talking about like a punishment phase for breaking that?
no, in alienation, like inalienable rights,
Oh, gotcha.
right? It means that you can't give it up if you want. It's a crime to try to give it up. So, for example, if you try to work again, if you try to invalidate the right to bear arms, what you're saying is you no longer want our people to have the mutual responsibility of reciprocal defense of one another against violations of their self-determination by self-determined means by sovereignty and reciprocity and display word and deed. So you're
Got
saying
it.
so it's a crime to try to even speak of these things. So an awful lot of my work, a chunk of my work on the Constitution, which is really just rule of law, is what is the inalienation that relates to this right. So if you can enumerate both rights, obligations, and alienations for any particular thing you have to produce, and then you're pretty much there. Now I've been searching for your Constitution here because I haven't read it since I don't know, it's been a while. Certainly,
I'm going to email it to you. You can redline it, and we'll look at it together at some point.
but I mean, realistically, people don't get that if you read Blackstone, you have to read the Blackstone, right, to understand the American Declaration, Constitution, and Bill of Rights. So fundamentally, Blackstone's book is the foundation upon which our Constitution sits. And without this, how they've been able to get away with it is that the Blackstone isn't stated and the foundations aren't stated in it. So the problem I have with every constitution compared to the American Constitution, with once it's understood as on Blackstone, is that they're basically fantasy moral literature. So if you show me how to do this, I'll find out. You show me what it is, I'll try to comment on it.
Cool. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'll email it over to you. One thing that you wanted to make sure that I touched on is we wanted to talk about trust formation on the right and why it's self-defeating and why the left doesn't tolerate leaders emerging because of it. Do you want to flesh that out for us?
Well, I think I've covered so much of it already here, but the problem is that because we have no, they've successfully warred against our institutions. Number one,
Mm-hmm.
excuse me, I have to start out differently. Western civilization has markets and everything. So where in China they monopolized the state and religion, and the Middle East they monopolized religion, and India, they monopolized culture, and in Africa, they failed. They still have the four models to monopolize anything. The Europeans didn't monopolize anything. The reason is that there are three means of human coercion. Is force, the state, and the military. There is inclusion, exclusion, undermining, the female method, religion. And there is exchange, in other words, contract. I can buy something or bribe you or whatever, trade with you. Those are the three. There's only three ways of human coercion. Well, we chose the third, which is contractualism, which everything has to result in the market. Mm-hmm. What that does, though, is it doesn't produce a monopoly of state or faith. It produces competing elites. And there's always going to be a three-pointed triangle of people with cognitively male personality and cognition, in other words, fascists. There's always going to be people with cognitively female dispositions, submission, which is Christians. And there's always going to be some cognitively reciprocal groups, libertarians. And there's going to be somewhere, everybody else is going to be within that triangle somewhere. And so
that makes sense.
What happens on the left is that they don't have this problem. They don't want to divide. They all go to the edge of the triangle, which is communism. Whereas we don't. We have, without a leader, heroic leader, to emerge, we can't get fascism, libertarianism, or fundamentalism. So what we need is we need a leader there. What the left does is they undermine every head. What do you call it? What's the gopher that pops up? Every head that pops
whack-a-mole.
Whack-a-mole. They whack every mole that pops up because only a mole can unify these three ludicrous branches. In other words, Christians think they're right. They're fucking idiots. Nazis think they're right. They're fucking idiots. Libertarians think they're right. They're fucking idiots. Why? Because they're all extremes.
Mm-hmm.
They're failing the fundamental principle of Western civilization is the compromise between the elites that maximizes adaptivity no matter which direction we go. This prevents us from stagnating as the Middle East did, as China did, as India did, and Africa never got off the ground. So we've maintained this. So each of these factions is an idiot, a group of idiots, rapidly destroying the ability for us to come together. And the only point I have to make is there's only one way to get three extremes together, and that's rule of law, because it doesn't say anybody's in charge. It says just the opposite. Our goal, regardless, is to prevent parasites, regardless of it's by church or state or commerce.
Well, if you can get all three of those working together towards the same end, which I think is what we're trying. Right.
Look what's his name? Keith did. Whatever, that fucking Catholic Christian loser there, kid. Right?
Oh yeah, I've got that.
Mm-hmm. Look what Spencer did. I mean, I'm never going to criticize him, right? Because he tried, right? Look what who's the guy at Countercurrents? Try the philosophical position. That's the medium position between the libertarians and the Christians. What about? I mean, you pick anybody on that spectrum. What they're trying to do is get clicks for their extremist fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
They're not trying to produce how do we defeat the enemy. I would actually argue the Northwest Front is still trying to retreat from the enemy. How do we defeat the enemy? You defeat the enemy by fixing the problem, which is increasing our rule of law so that the means by which they undermine the female weaponized warfare is as oppressed in people and as punishable as the male method of antisocial behavior warfare. So we just have to get that in place, and then sortition will do its job. They'll move to theirs. But so you have to defeat that permanently. I consider it defeating the Abrahamic method of deceit. But the problem is that means because the Abrahamic method of deceit that is behind the Semitic Abrahamic religions, including Christianity, is to undermine the aristocracy, and it succeeded. What happened in Europe, though, is that the aristocracy captured the church as administration of the peasantry. That's because if you, under primogeniture, in order to keep the land from being divided, with the leading male kept the manor property. You sent that some of the other males, the males who weren't going to get married off to somebody else of wealth, into the church, and they acquired land on behalf of the church, which meant the aristocracy was just church and state and maintained all this property, so that by the end of the High Middle Ages, the church owned 50% of the land in Europe, which means it's as parasitic as the church, as the state is today, owning 50% of our income.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's a really profound statement too. I think people are going to have to listen to this a few times over and over and put away some of their preconceived ideas of what's offensive or what's right, and just try to get to the bottom of how we actually get there.
Under trifunctionalism, in other words, under the tolerance for specialization in the extremes, so that we can use market forces to compromise in our democracy, so to speak. Under that market for leadership, there's no way not to offend someone, because each person naturally doubles down on their genetic intuitions. Mm-hmm. You don't see liberals changing no matter what happens, because it's genetic. You don't see Jews changing because it's genetic. You're not going to see it change. So the answer is, of course, you're going to have problems unifying. You're going to offend somebody, but that's the law job. That's why we invented testimonial truth, why we invented military reporting, empiricism, testimonial truth in courts, confession in the church, and truth before face in the commons. Who else did that? Nobody else did that. We're the only people that use truth before face on the planet.
It's true.
You know how expensive that is? We have the most expensive normative economy because it's the most expensive to status. So what are all these guys doing? They're out there in all these fringe extremes trying to obtain status, but what they're doing is tearing the fucking thing down. They're making us vulnerable to the left.
So what's the strategy that you would implement to circumvent that vulnerability that we're creating?
Because what are all they trying to do? They're trying to persuade. They're trying to convince you all of us to join their extreme team, all of which will fail. And there's only one. Why? Because it's all talk. There's only one thing that isn't talk. That's action. The only action means you give up your leadership and your status, and you give up your fantasies, your role playing, your status advantage, your ability to attract people to listen to you. You're feeling good about people listening to you, and what you do is you freaking show up, shut up, and do what's needs to be done.
Makes a lot of sense. Oh, I appreciate it. Absolutely.
So you either get out of dreamland, which is the extremes, and into actionable reality, or you just live LARPing. And that's what they're all doing.
One of the things that you were talking about earlier that I really want to expand on is, because I've been having some trouble kind of fitting actual physical occurrences into this framework of rent seeking. What does that encompass to you? What does that mean?
It's really simple, really. It's a really bad word, and unfortunately, it's the term. And so under reciprocity, you have to satisfy certain conditions. Fully informed, it's basically truthful, to the best of your ability. Warranted, in other words, I'm warranting you, I'm fully informing you, right? I'm being truthful. Mm-hmm. Voluntary, in other words, I haven't coerced you, you're doing this out of your choice. Transfer or exchange of demonstrated interest, things that you have shown that you have invested in. This means, so that what this means, and the last is, and a prohibition on externality, in other words, imposition of cost by others. What this means is you have to, in order to benefit from participation in the commons, you have to add value.
So then usury obviously is rent seeking,
There we go. He hit it out of the park.
right?
Asking for privileges from the government is rent seeking.
So then also would not a no bid government contract be rent seeking, right?
Well, I mean, under yeah, the problem is we get into that particular case, and the spectrum is covered. There are things that are no bid because there's no one else can do them, right?
Right, sure.
Right.
So some outliers, right?
It's just a stupid. Well, the problem is I've been in that position is no one else can do it but us, my company, right? So it's like, well, but it is you assuming that I'm actually charging a premium for that. I'm charging a premium because I have a skill no one else has. It doesn't mean I'm getting away with anything.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't want to the point
Yeah,
is
I didn't mean it as a gotcha.
yeah. No, I know what you did, but I want to say I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So it's more of whenever when here's the big crime. The government borrows money from you and me, gives it to the banking system, they multiply it by 10 or 20 times and take all the profit from having done so as interest. Whereas there's absolutely no value in the financial sector doing that. Whereas, why doesn't the government just do that? Because it's all statistical. The Treasury, why don't you and I able to maximize our credit card with the freaking Treasury and pay interest to the Treasury or not pay interest at all? Why do we do this? Why do we let more money than we pay into the government in taxes, right? Federal government taxes.
Created as debt.
Why do we let this get into private hands who just use it to war against our institutions of cultural production? Now, if you starve the beast, that's all we got to do. Now, tell me if most of the population isn't going to go for that solution. We'll kill the financial sector, make all consumer goods state goods, and limit the financial sector to producing capital. We'll limit rent seeking. In other words, we'll prohibit things like buying up property. Arbitrage, buying up property so that you raise the price so you can sell it later to people who have to borrow money from you.
Well, that's what the the BlackRock group is doing now.
Why not privatize why not nationalize all that? Why, I don't want to say nationalize Visa, MasterCard, but you could nationalize the network, right?
Sure.
So these people are professional criminals and we let them get away with it. And so, this thing applies at every level. So why do people in the government get special, get to have all these privileges when the reason people got privileges in the government was originally because they were so underpaid? I live in Connecticut right now, and I'm going to leave, but I live in Connecticut right now, and the problem is that the reason the Connecticut's bankrupt is all this accumulated state pensions.
That's right.
Right. So they're killing this. They killed the state with communist, the Soviet. Connecticut and California, Massachusetts and California, most imitated the Soviets. You know why that is, because what institutions? Yale's in Connecticut, Harvard's in Massachusetts, and
UCLA's in California.
Right. So we followed the Soviets the most.
It's the Frankfurt School. They came over into Columbia University during the war.
Spread it from there. Yeah. And they did it on purpose. And they said, we're going to use the black people against the white people. And we're going to just bring about the communist revolution, or at least what they really mean is bring about our control of the government and be able to capture. So that's what they did. And so it's just it's war crimes as far as I'm concerned. And so we're doing war reparations. I don't really care about that. I don't care about punishing the enemy so much as I do is just getting ourselves so that we can continue our long history of 3 generations of dragging mankind kicking and screaming out of ignorance, superstition, poverty, hard labor, starvation, disease, and the tyranny of a nature all but hostile to man. And the rest of the barbarians, I don't care what happens to them. There's no intrinsic value to human life. We've figured that out. So let's just separate from the barbarians. There's no value, and we learned over and over again, you cannot profit from colonization. The only way to profit is replacement. And I can't think even that. I mean, we kind of got to the point where replacement is not that valuable. If you have the center of the United States, and you have the Mississippi and Ohio river valleys, you can feed the whole planet. It doesn't matter if they want to starve themselves to, they want to overbreed themselves.
So I lost my train of thought. I apologize.
Sorry, I'm overloading you at this point.
It happens a lot with you, right?
Yep.
It's not easy being a bright guy. I can't imagine being as smart as somebody.
My editor is hysterical. He's a PhD, right? And he's from a long history of PhDs. Anyway, it's like, dude, you have any idea what it's like trying to keep up with you? And I'm like, no, I actually don't have any idea, but I don't care.
That reminds me of another thing that I was thinking about earlier. And there's a philosophical point of view or a psychological point of view that, people really only see things through their fishbowl, right? You're familiar with the fishbowl theory?
Yeah, of course.
And I think you were touching on that earlier. And I wonder if you could maybe
sure
tell me how that applies to moving forward.
Well, you can't. I mean, you
can't take a fishbowl off somebody's head. So what do we do?
You can't. You can't. That's the point. That's why you want to separate, because you can't fix it. And everybody thinks, especially the premise of the left, is based on 4 big lies. The end of scarcity, in other words, the false promise of infinite growth. In other words, scarcity is over with. The nature of man, that man is benevolent, moral, and altruistic, when all the evidence everywhere across all times and all people, regardless of case, is that man is amoral and is only as moral as he needs to be in context.
Also the libertarian misconception.
Yeah, well, libertarian is it's Marxism for the middle classes and Marxism for the lower class. So it's because it's end of common property, make everything private property, where communism is make everything common property and private. Same fucking difference. And there's no difference between libertarianism and communism. Same fucking lie. So that's based on the lie of the nature of man. The third lie is the malleability of man. In other words, is that we can be modified. We can't be modified. Matter of fact, all we do is continuously double down on our instincts. We thought that, as we see in the much touted Scandinavian evidence, that the more equal you make a society, the more women gravitate toward women things, and the more men gravitate toward men things. I'll tell you why that is in a minute. And so the reality, and then last one is that you can defeat the laws of nature or natural selection. In other words, they lie that the classes aren't the result of accumulated dysgenics, that that most mutations are not negative, and that there's always regression to the mean, except by very careful selection, which is of course why you get the British upper class and the Jewish upper class and the Indian upper class. The Indian upper class probably being the best example in the world of how to use a caste system to prevent outmarriage. So in the human beings, I'm going to try to avoid the physics for this, but to say, in any system, the evolution will favor the greatest opposing directions that produce the greatest compromise, because this creates the biggest difference in time, space, and energy by which to convert from one condition to the other. In other words, masculine and feminine brains are the most extreme property of humans. They evolved quite differently, the fact that we are grown in utero by baiting the neural economy with hormones, right? So that we get a more female brain, which is more laterally integrated and more now and more empathic. And we get a more masculine brain, which is more front to back. And then that is more time oriented, faster, more faster and more systematizing. So we get the empathizing mind on one end and the systematizing mind on the other, which I am the extreme example of. I'm on the board. I have very slight, tiny Asperger's, which you can obviously tell, but with a little effort, I'm sure I could go full blown autistic. So you have the masculine mind in me on one end, purely systematizing, and you have the crazy chick who personalizes everything, can't not personalize everything. It's always about her on the other, right? So you have this spectrum, but most of us are a distribution of female and male traits. So
Sure.
you have about a third of people who think cognitively masculinely, a third of people who cognitively femininely, and a third of people who are somewhere in the middle, who we think of as the undecideds. This is just a loose, right, statistic. We can actually get fine numbers on this, but these are
Hmm.
just natural developments of cognition, and that natural distribution maximizes our potential for adaptation to different circumstances. Because while Darwinists get it wrong, get it half right, saying that evolution only favors complexity and the exploration of niches, they don't get the very obvious idea that man's niche is adaptation itself. And so we have maximized adaptation physically, socially, and cognitively, and we expressed it in tools such that we adapt even faster. So this basic difference in human nature provides the origin of our rapid adaptivity and our need for compromise. We think of it as cooperation as the means of synthesizing information across greater spans of time and space. In other words, we're just computing the universe like any other part of it does.
And so we call these things masculine and feminine, and that makes sense because it does map out onto the sexes very well. Obviously, there's exceptions and all of that.
Sure, there's very feminine men and there's very masculine women. However, just like left-handedness is a developmental timing issue, it appears that just like homosexuality and sexual interest, these are just noise in the general rule. But if I wanted to sit here and tell you how the cell gestates into a human being and how different traits span, believe it or not, I can do that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not we know the mechanical process of evolution. We know why domestication syndrome works in limiting the spread of certain information away from the spinal column. So we know why we look like some Europeans look way more neotenized, and some East Asians, Japanese in particular, Chinese and Japanese and Koreans look highly neotenized, way more than us. You almost can't tell the difference between male and female, such that men have very small male and females both have very small genitals, and they even somewhat lost the ability to sweat. So
Interesting.
you have this incredible spectrum of neon versus if you live in Africa, what's your problem? I don't beat on Africans. I mean, I beat on white people for being stupid victims of their own stupidity. But I mean, I don't beat on Africans because look at where they live. They live in the worst disease gradient with the highest density of hostile forces in the world. So if you can't mature in Africa really fast, you're screwed. Because what happens? Most people die as children, right? It's the
Mm-hmm.
most time. So of course they mature more fast and more deeply. I mean, it looks like they've matured. If you go down to look at, I mean, I'm sorry I don't want to pick on them, but they're really freaking ugly. The Native Australians. I
Right.
mean, they went toward even more intent. They lost the ability to make fire.
Now, that brings up a little bit of, and that's hilarious, by the way. That brings up a little bit of cognitive dissonance for me, and I can look at an African male and an African female, and I can see that physiologically, there's not a whole lot of difference. You get the same wide shoulders, the face structures are all very similar. But you're saying that is actually different than the European neoteny, or am I misunderstanding neoteny?
You're misunderstood.
Okay.
Africans as a whole mature, they gestate faster, sexually mature fast, sexually reproduce faster. And because of that, like any less domesticated animal, they're more aggressive because that's what sexual maturity does, is makes you aggressive.
Right, right.
Sorry, and that's what neoteny does. It provides you agency. It provides your neurology and your behavior time to grow. So it extends the period under which you are childlike and forgiving and open and not trying to express dominance.
Gotcha. Okay, I was misunderstanding that kind of adolescent period as kind of a melding between the
Yeah.
sexual characteristics.
Just it's really simple. During maturity, to make a man, you basically poison the poison the thing, and you inhibit some kind of growth so that you can force others. Same thing happens when we mature. You flood in this testosterone that that sort of inhibits certain kind of thought, so that you need to get stimulation through other kind of thought. And for females, it's the other way around. They, as soon as they hit puberty, they become somewhat psychotic, and the reason, of course, is that the nature's telling them to extend their nervous system to also include their offspring. So
Gotcha.
they have to be obsessed about very subtle things. So they process vast amounts of now information, and we expand vast amounts of time and space information. And of course, these are basic generalizations, but they show up
Sure.
everywhere. They show up most of the extremes. For example, women don't seem to be able to produce anything innovative at the extremes, because all innovation at the extremes requires systematizing, modeling, prediction, and wayfinding between those different states of prediction. And this is why women, for example, do mathematics like Einstein did, with pictures and symbols as if it's language, why Einstein got it wrong, and men don't. Why Hilbert couldn't solve the problem as fast as Einstein, because it was harder to solve the systematizing problem by causality rather than pictures and descriptions. So we see this masculine, feminine across it. Of course, the Jews being the most because they're half European, the most aggressive version of the feminine cognition, and Europeans being the most exemplary of the masculine systematizing and, frankly, calm disposition.
And so this you're talking about the neurological system having to extend outward to include offspring. So if you see childless women and the way that they behave, there's a very big biological reason for that. Yes.
Correct. They're just human. Think of it this way: your nervous system evolved to carry a cognitive load, just like your body will calcify if you don't carry weights around or walk around. Things will go wrong with it because you're not using it. It's the same thing with brains, right? And brains operate this way. So in this sense, men who don't physically exercise don't get enough positive feedback, and they stop caring about the world, and they end up playing video games. So same way for women is that they try to fill their cognitive load. And so ancients described this as we all want novelties, right? But what it means is you want to fill your cognitive load. And people like to work at their cognitive load, not beyond it or under it. So we always seek some confidence. So if you meet women who have 5 or 6 kids, they become as rational as men.
Mm-hmm.
They have to. So that's why women are crazy and vote crap if they're single, and they're not crazy and they don't vote crap if they're married with kids. You can't afford to be stupid if you're a married woman, right? You can afford to have your unregulated, unbounded emotions desperately seek something to do if you are a single woman.
As long as the state controls for externalities, right?
Correct. And especially if those externalities can be, in other words, if you can complain against men indirectly without having to capture one, and you can receive benefits indirectly through the state. In other words, you can marry the state instead of men, then you don't have to pay for those benefits the way you have to pay for them by emotional regulation and caretaking. So it makes perfect sense. People are bots. And if you get anything out of following my work, is it's almost like if you don't understand what I've done, you're a bot. And the only best my work can do is try to help you not be a bot. But the left, they want to be bots. Because controlling those impulses, I mean, don't pick on women, man. I mean, if you had a brain that was continually throwing shit in your face, in your mind, interrupting you like Windows like window when you go to a website and it's got some hacker stuff and it throws up a million windows. That's a
Right.
woman's mind,
Yeah.
right? So how does a woman learn to take that resource and put it to constructive ends? Well, how do men learn to take their violence and put it to destructive ends? We spent 50,000 years trying to direct male behavior to produce commons, right? And we did. I mean, we spent more than that because it took pairing off to make us stop having dangerous alphas. So
Yeah.
for a long time, we've been doing this. But we just let women into the economy and unleash the fact that for their history, their husbands and fathers and mothers and sisters and aunts and grandmothers have been constraining their emotions. And so we let that madness, we open Pandora's box without adding the same suppression of female antisocial behavior to our law that we had added to men. So that's why I say it's, you know, I don't necessarily need to do anything for my work to say all we have to do is do the same suppression of antisocial female behavior, which is what the Jews do, is they weaponize that antisocial female behavior as a means of undermining the institution of cultural production and undermining our group cohesion. We just have to outlaw that behavior, and it turns out it's fairly easy to do that. And I would say that the end result of most of my work is to achieve that goal.
Yeah, propertarianism is exactly that in codifying the outlawing of these undermining and anti-civilizational strategies. Yeah.
Yeah, I just turned it into a formal logic. Seriously, it's like math. It's actually like programming language. But if you can write it in I mean, there's no mystery left to what they do. And it's like if I put the problem with knowing my work is true, so to speak, is
Hmm.
you have to know a lot to know it's true, right? But you can reduce it to like basically 5 posters,
Yeah.
right? It's not once you know it, then it's 5 checklists. Are they doing this? Are they doing that? Are we doing that? And it's it. And so fundamentally, what the culmination of my work is a constitution that puts all that stuff in there as a set of checklists so that people can't anymore lie, cheat, steal, and scam from others. And we don't have another dark age brought about by another Abrahamic invention of a new method of lying, cheating, and stealing.
It's brilliant stuff. There's very little that I've found, except for some huge names in the field of intellectual discourse that's inspired me as much as your work has. So I really appreciate you putting the time and the effort into that.
Thanks. So we stand on the shoulders of giants, right? I mean, and I'm just an autist that happens to be born in the right decade to benefit from the work of the 3 generations before me in their frustrated attempt to solve this problem. And we got the internet, we got computers, medical imaging, genetics, and the internet to rapidly discount how difficult it was to synthesize that information at the time that I had available to do it. So I'm just another leaf in the in the flotsam of the river of time. you know?
Yeah. What I say to people all the time is just what you said. We stand on the shoulders of giants, and what I add is that, and we have the gall to question their posture.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are looking to deconstruct, and I know where that impulse comes from. They have this deconstructive impulse to tear things down and start nitpicking through the rubble, to try to think.
It's really it's theft. See what they're doing. They're not honest enough to pay the status cost of asking a question and then for admitting their condition of ignorance. They're not honest enough to pay that status cost. In other words, they're violating our law against truth before face. And
Mhm.
so they're violating that law. They're stealing from the informational commons. They're stealing from the normative commons to posture that they know more than they do. When all they have to say is, I don't get it. Can somebody explain it to me? right?
Or what I say is, I don't get it, but somebody else a lot smarter than me did, so I'm just going to listen to them.
Yes, well, whatever, right? I mean,
Yeah.
listening to them and having explained to me is the same thing, right?
Yeah.
But for me, that's why I said I'll talk to you. I don't do too many of these anymore because it's just not worth my fucking time. And because I can't find, the number of people who don't come to me and try to steal
Yeah.
is just near zero.
Well,
So
I'll tell you right now, I'm definitely trying to steal, right? But but I'm only trying to steal some ideas.
conducting a trade.
Yeah.
You're sharing this what I'm saying by honest interrogatory, but you're getting value out of it, and maybe you'll get value out of me helping you with your constitution. So I don't know. It's to me, I'm in a reciprocal exchange right now, and I'm perfectly happy about it.
Perfect. Yeah. Myself as well. I think I've taken up about 2 hours of your time. I don't know what kind of time constraints you have on your life, but I don't want to keep you too long. Is there anything else that you'd like to make sure that we get highlighted in at least this, our first conversation?
I would say that uh, John tried to take my work and make a populist movement.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't pay him enough money to afford to be the front man for the movement he created. I took the hit to try to help our people understand this message, and the shitheads jumped all over me for it. And
I
so,
remember that, the July the 4th thing.
right, and they didn't understand a word I said. They didn't pay attention. All they did was they let the enemy take photos and whatever of me sweating in the July summer sun and showing how you don't let the enemy bait you into hazard as a negative when the answer is I just showed you how to win. And and I gave up on them because of that.
Yeah.
So the extremes, these people, the kind of people who are online are generally destroying any message or any possibility of success. In other words, they're committing suicide.
It's the Keith Woods model.
The Keith Woods model is to commit suicide for clicks,
Yeah.
right? So you can feel like you're not the ass end of the genetic pool getting raped and pillaged out of genetic persistence or even out of a decent life because you want those little status perks you believe make you feel good about yourself. So what you're talking about is false prophets selling you false promises in order so that you commit gracefully and slowly commit suicide while thinking there's some chance you're not.
Well, that sounds like Western civilization as expressed through Christianity to me.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Anyway. All right, brother. So thank you for your time. Thanks for the intellectual honesty. I enjoyed this conversation, and hopefully I'll talk to you again sometime.
Absolutely. I'm gonna, like I say, just clean it up a little bit. I'll send it to you. Make sure that you're happy with it. You can listen through it,
I'm not
and
gonna worry.
and
Don't worry. Just send it to me so I have a copy. All right.
cool. We'll do.
Bye bye.